Notre Dame, Ohio State, national championship game. It is Monday night, January 20th, Mercedes-Benz Stadium, next to the site of the assassinated Georgia Dome. A shame, an absolute shame. One of the worst things to ever happen in my home state was the murder of the Georgia Dome. But I digress. They're going to play this thing on Monday night. Ohio State down to an 8.5-point favorite. They opened as a 9.5-point favorite. Transfer quarterback is going to get a lot of the talk here. So transfer quarterback, of course, you got Will Howard at Ohio State by way of Kansas State, and you got Riley Leonard at Notre Dame by way of Duke. That's not the story to me. The story to me is supporting cast. Will Howard's got a really good one around him. Riley Leonard does not have what Will Howard has. So that doesn't mean you can't win. Notre Dame's been winning. Don't I know it? Don't I know? Can't I attest to the fact that Notre Dame's been winning? But it just means that Notre Dame has to go about it a little bit differently than Ohio State. There's a reason that they are an underdog of this size. I would install them as the same number. In fact, I'll tell you what our model thinks about the game Tuesday night. But the talk about the quarterbacks is probably going to be absent that context. But the talk about the teams, especially with Ohio State, to me, has to go over to the defensive side. First and foremost, I don't care what the offense has done. The fact that they got 16 sacks in 3 college football playoff games and they had none in their 2 losses this year, it speaks volumes. It speaks about adjustment, but it also just speaks about accountability and guys stepping up and playing up to their potential. I also think that, this is what I think now, no one's running on Ohio State. I don't think anyone's going to do it. I don't think Notre Dame's going to do it. If they prove me wrong, they can win this game, but it's hard. Texas was the real case study because Tennessee was blown out early. So they weren't going to try and run the ball a whole lot. Oregon got blown out early. So the stat sheet looks really, really weird. But Texas was in the game the whole way. Texas stayed committed to the run the whole game. And Ohio State held them to 29 carries for 58 total yards. Sark, famously at this point, got down near the goal line and was not willing to trust his ground game. He tried it once, and then they went toss sweep. I'm not here to relitigate that or anything, at least yet. Maybe later in the show. But what a coaching matchup, man. Not just head coaches. Freeman, Denbrock, Golden versus Day, Kelly, and Knowles. That is as good as it gets. I think that's the best sort of three-headed monster versus three-headed monster that we could have had in the college football playoff. Now, I didn't think Notre Dame was going to make it to the national title game, but if you ask me best head coach coordinator pairings in this thing, I would have had Notre Dame up there. I've said that all year, actually. I said that before the season. So here's how I see it. I'm going to do the full breakdown on Tuesday. Notre Dame has to have a plan here where they win with 20 points, which sounds crazy, but Texas was right around there until the strip score late in the game. Texas held Ohio State offensively to around that kind of number. So Notre Dame has to be able to do that. Notre Dame probably can do that. But even if you do that, you got to find the points. You got to find at least 21 in that scenario. They don't all have to be offensive. We know. Watching Notre Dame this year, they haven't always been offensive. But here's the thing about the way Notre Dame's going to play Ohio State, at least if history is any indication. They play man at as high a percentage as any team that was in the postseason. They play man at as high a percentage as any team Ohio State will have faced all year. Not shockingly, most teams do not want to man up on Ohio State. Will Howard, Ohio State quarterback, has seen a man look on 19% of his passing snaps this year. Notre Dame runs it against everyone. So unless they buck that trend, then they're going to ask their defenders to do something pretty extraordinary here. And that's try to do what no one else had the stones to try and do, or maybe everyone else was smart enough not to try and do against Ohio State. 2 things that I still believe about Notre Dame here. Even though I got proven wrong against Penn State, I'm going right back to the well. I think they do have to win the turnover battle, and I do not think they can afford to play from 2 possessions down. Now, I was just dead wrong about that with Penn State. I was of the opinion that Notre Dame needed to win the turnover battle. It wasn't that. I wondered if they could win the game when they lost the turnover battle. But the second part was I wondered if you paired that with them trailing by more than a possession, were they equipped to come from behind? Well, they were. And they did lose the turnover battle. And they gave up 200 yards rushing to boot, and they still won. So even though that happened against Penn State, I'm going to tell you this is a different caliber team, And you better not be playing from behind, and you better win the turnover battle, or you better not lose it. Let me put it that way. And also, another thing that popped up in the Penn State game that you will have to have duplicated here is the explosive pass. They had a touchdown pass. Notre Dame had a touchdown pass of 54 yards. They had a 36-yard completion, a 32-yard completion. That has not been the norm for them. It was there. It's probably the reason they ended up winning against Penn State. So that's got to be there. Both of these teams are pretty disciplined, but it's really, really interesting. When I talk about discipline, I'm talking about a completely different thing. Like I'm talking about what my eyeballs are seeing, because the stat sheet will lie to you in this sport, especially when you deal with good teams. So I will give you a perfect case study here. This happened with Alabama a lot. It's happened with Georgia a lot. It's happened with Michigan and Penn State this year, but nobody has been victimized by being good in the eyes of officials more than Ohio State. The common train of thought amongst most college football fans is the good teams get all the calls. The powerhouse teams get all the breaks. It's wrong. It's flawed. It's anecdotally supported at best. But the rule is the complete opposite. This piece of paper here is a great example of that. There are 134 FBS teams. Ohio State is 134 out of 134 in terms of penalties called against opponents. Now, I want you to think just on the surface about how unlikely that is. If every team's equal, and we just happen to be talking about any one of them, how unlikely, how statistically against the odds it is that that team we just so happen to be talking about is dead last. But then I want you to understand this isn't just a normal team. This is a team that is harassing quarterbacks, especially in the postseason. This is a team that is littered with future Sunday players. In other words, they're better than most everyone else out of those 134 teams, which means if you've got higher caliber athletes defensively, statistically, it should be more likely that opposing teams are holding you, that opposing teams are being forced to do things probably because your level of athlete is better than their level of athlete, and yet the guys in the striped shirts are telling me, nope, I don't see it. I don't see it. Where's the hold? I don't see it. Jack Sawyer hadn't been called for a hold since like the Reagan administration. It's insane. So the reason I'm saying that is you could think in theory that Notre Dame's got these injuries on the offensive line. Their left tackle is now gone again. It's like been a chronic headline all year. So I could think to myself, boy, that's going to be tough, and someone's going to be put in a really vulnerable position, and penalties could be an issue there. But if they don't call it, it's not an issue. So I don't really know how to process that. Now, to Notre Dame's credit, if we want to call it that, it's not much better with them. They're in the 90s in terms of opponent penalty rate. They're just not calling it. It's there. Anyone with eyeballs who watches these games is seeing it. It's there, but they're not calling it. But Ohio State, uncharacteristically, I would say, was penalized in the Texas game to such a degree that it could have switched the outcome of the game. It didn't, but that was a wild card factor that could have been a variable that changed the outcome. It didn't. So those are some very, very early thoughts from me on the Ohio State-Notre Dame game. The reason I disproportionately focus on Notre Dame is because I think there are default edges up and down the board with Ohio State to where if the game plays out heads up, Ohio State will win. So it's going to take some tilting of a few different categories by Notre Dame for them to pull this game out. They've been doing it all year. They have not faced an opponent the caliber of Ohio State, but that's okay. If anyone can do it, they can do it.